He left me penniless after the divorce. Then my 10-year-old revealed the truth. Rachel sat on the worn bench outside the courthouse, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a weathered leather handbag. The autumn air was crisp, but clouded with a gray haze, as if even the sky mourned her unfolding reality. The 10th anniversary photo had been in this same bag, tucked beside the faded lipstick she brought to brighten the day just hours ago. Now forgotten, meaningless. She was a woman pressed into the margins of her own life, facing a truth she hadn't dared imagine. Greg was gone. And not just gone, he had left her penniless. She'd spent the morning sitting quietly through the sterile, echoing halls of the courthouse, watching lawyers in sharp suits barter lives and futures like stock shares. Greg had arrived in his polished navy suit, that confident smirk in place, towering over her like a judge in his own courtroom. Even his words felt like verdicts delivered in cold stone. Rachel, you've been, well, let's call it what it is, a support system, but I can't be cancered by what you've become. Those words haunted her now, their sting sharper than the cold breeze biting at her cheeks. She once thought they'd built a life together, his ambitions fueled by her sacrifices, her days spent managing the house and Mason's school, making dinner, juggling doctor's visits, all the invisible work that kept their world turning smoothly. But in court, her absence from a paycheck was twisted into uselessness, her efforts minimized to a weakness. Mason's bright smile at breakfast this morning echoed painfully in her mind. He had asked why Daddy seemed so angry, why the house felt quiet and cold now. She forced a smile, inside crumbling. Daddy's just upset, honey, but I'll take care of you, always. She meant it with every ounce of her being. For Mason, she'd carry every shame, every hardship. Outside, a muffled buzz of city life pressed on. People hurried past, indifferent to her pain, their eyes flicking away from the woman sitting alone, clutching her baby blue cardigan tightly. The weight of growing bills seemed to press down on her shoulders, the confusion of legal jargon swimming in her head like waves swallowing a single desperate swimmer. The reality was unbearable. 10 years of partnership erased with a signature, her security stripped away. Rachel's throat tightened as she looked up at the courthouse steps, already imagining the long nights ahead, searching through wilting job postings, courts that didn't care, and the hollow echo of a life rearranged by someone else's selfish design. The world labeled her powerless now, but beneath her sinking heart burned a quiet ember, the fierce, unwavering hope to rebuild, to fight, to protect Mason's future no matter the cost. She stood slowly, brushing a stray tear beneath her lashes, the crisp air filling her lungs as if urging her awake. The fight had just begun, and though the world doubted her worth, Rachel knew she had to rise, because this wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, love, and the life she was determined to reclaim. The courtroom was a cold, intimidating place, its fluorescent lights casting a harsh glare on everything and everyone inside. Rachel felt the weight of those lights and the eyes, as if they were pressing down on her chest. Across the room, Greg sat stiffly in a tailored suit, his expression unreadable. But it was the man beside him, his lawyer, who made Rachel's stomach twist with dread. The lawyer stood, voice sharp and precise, slicing through the courtroom air as he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, it's evident that Mrs. Newton has been wholly dependent on Mr. Newton's success. A woman who has chosen to forego personal career ambitions in favor of domestic responsibilities, she is, frankly, a financial burden." Rachel's heart pounded. She clenched her fists under the polished wooden bench, trying to hold back the flush creeping up her neck. The sting of his words wasn't just in their content, but in the way he said them, each syllable dripping with disdain. She was made to appear not as a partner who held together a household, but as a worthless drain, a woman incapable of earning her own keep. And worse, many of the people she'd once called friends seemed to nod silently in agreement. Outside the courthouse after the hearing, whispers followed her like shadows. At the coffee shop down the street, the barista's smile was polite but distant. At the grocery store, acquaintances crossed to the other aisle as she approached. The rumor mill churned rapidly, Did you hear what happened? They say she did something to deserve being left with nothing." The words echoed in her ears even when the streets were quiet. At Mason's school, the chill was even more palpable. Other parents who used to wave and chatter stopped mid-conversation when she approached. Their eyes scanned her clothes, her tired posture, and sometimes settled on Mason's side, as though silently questioning what kind of life they were now living. Rachel felt a heavy knot of shame tightening in her chest, her son's small hand in hers trembling slightly. One afternoon, after picking Mason up, she noticed a group of parents whispering behind cupped hands, glancing her way with pity that felt like blame. Mason caught her glancing and squeezed her hand, his brow furrowed with the kind of understanding too mature for his age. "Mom, did I do something wrong?" he asked quietly. Her heart broke. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups don't always make things easy. But we'll get through this, okay?" Rachel forced a smile, the weight of isolation settling deeper around her. The constant barrage of whispers, the distance from those she once counted on. It was like being slowly dragged under by a current she couldn't fight. The humiliation wasn't just in the letters she received from Greg's lawyers or the dry legalese tossed in court. It was in the everyday looks and silences that made her feel smaller, invisible. Every night she sat by Mason's bedside, her voice gentle as she tried to shield him from the harshness looming over them. Behind closed doors, though, her defenses crumbled. She glanced at the stack of bills on the kitchen table, and then at her reflection in the darkened window. A woman underestimated, overlooked, struggling to stand. But deep inside, beneath the shame and exhaustion, a quiet ember glowed, the quiet but relentless hope that the truth she carried within would somehow find its way to light. Even as the world tried to write her off as nothing, Rachel vowed she wouldn't disappear quietly into the shadows. Not for Mason. Not for herself. As the sun set behind the city's skyline, casting long shadows on the cracked sidewalks, Rachel's resolve hardened. There was a long road ahead, but somehow she would walk it. Wouldn't you want to know what happens when someone refuses to stay down? Rachel woke before dawn again, the soft hum of the city still wrapped in darkness outside her small apartment window. The worn-out coffee maker sputtered to life as she prepared for another day that felt heavier than the last. She glanced at Mason's sleeping form in the next room, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, and whispered, "I'll find a way, Mason. We'll be okay." But inside, the worry gnawed at her relentlessly. She packed a paper bag with peanut butter sandwiches and an apple, slipping it quietly onto the counter before heading out to a local temp agency. The fluorescent lights flickered in the crowded waiting room, where hopeful faces bounced between muted conversations and nervous fidgeting. When her name was finally called, Rachel showed up with a resume so thin, it barely felt like armor against the world. The agency promised short-term assignments, data entry, reception, retail, anything to keep the bills from piling higher. She swallowed the lump rising in her throat and nodded, trying to mask the exhaustion and fear flaring behind tired eyes. At the first gig, she worked as a cashier in a cramped convenience store, her hands sticky with spilled soda and receipts. The hours were long, the pay minimal, and the customers impatient. One man slammed coins on the counter, grumbling about the line. Rachel's cheeks flushed as she apologized. Heart pounding, with a shame deeper than the long days without steady income. She left cashiering after a week when her back ached and there was no chance of more hours. Garage sale signs sprouted around the neighborhood by weekend, and Rachel stuffed every closet with things cluttering a life that felt foreign now. The china set she once polished carefully, stacked books with dog-eared pages, even Mason's outgrown toys. She sat for hours at the curb beneath the thin sun, watching plates and picture frames gather dust. The few customers that came haggled fiercely, and Rachel refused to charge less than she felt was fair, but every dollar felt like a small victory. Food pantries became unfamiliar places where she found herself scanning shelves and waiting in line behind men and women whose faces told stories of struggle, much like hers. The scent of canned beans and stale bread mingled in the cold air, and Rachel's throat tightened with a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. She clenched Mason's small hand tightly that first time she brought him, wanting to shield him from the anxiety she felt bleeding through her own skin. Job applications piled on her kitchen table, many requiring full resumes and recent work history she no longer had. Employers rejected her before phone interviews began, calling her overqualified, or politely suggesting her presence might not fit their team environment. One manager even commented, "Your experience is impressive, but frankly, it's intimidating for a role like this." Rachel's lips pressed together tightly to hold back tears, the subtle message clear. What she had done for the past decade wasn't valued here. One quiet evening, Mason slipped a folded paper onto a kitchen table as Rachel was sorting bills. "I made this for you," he said softly, voice hopeful. She unfolded the paper to find a handmade comic, colorful and earnest. Mason's little world, where a brave superhero faced all kinds of monsters, always winning. Rachel smiled, but it was fragile, brittle. "It's beautiful, Mason. You're my hero." She reached across, pulling him into a careful, protective hug. But deep inside, fear clenched her chest like a vice. The world outside was harsh and unyielding, and she wasn't sure she had what it took to keep up this fight for their future. Yet in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by unpaid bills and fading light, a soft ember of hope kindled. For Mason, she would endure every setback, every small rejection, every exhausted night, because surrendering wasn't an option. Not yet. And maybe, just maybe, the next nooning would bring a new chance, a new door to open. Could hope alone be enough to carry them forward? The day the utilities shut off felt like the final blow, an undeniable, crushing symbol of just how deep the bottom had become. Rachel had come home from a day of juggling a short, thankless temp job and restless grocery store lines to find the stark silence that immediately told her everything before she even stepped inside. The hum of the refrigerator was gone. The lights flickered uselessly when she flipped the switch, plunging the little apartment into an uneasy half-shadow. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, the weight of the cold and quiet seeping into her bones. Mason's footsteps echoed down the hall, small and hesitant. He appeared in the doorway, cheeks flushed pink from running, his wide eyes swimming with tears that clung like drops waiting to fall. "Mom," Mason whispered, voice fragile enough to break. "Some kids at school, they were laughing. They called our house poor, said we don't have money for anything." He looked at her, searching for answers she wished she had. "Why? Why are they saying that?" Rachel knelt slowly, pulling her son into a careful embrace, the heat of her body trying to smother his fears. His small shoulders shook against her chest, and she fought back a wave of nausea, the sharp taste of guilt biting deep. "I'm so sorry, Mason. I wanted to protect you, I really did." Her voice trembled, fragile as a glass about to shatter. "But sometimes adults don't make things easy. I promise you this won't be forever. We'll find a way." Tears slipped down her cheeks, blending with Mason's, the two of them together in that small pocket of despair. She felt exposed and utterly defeated. The shame wasn't just in the unpaid bills, stacking by the door, or the cold that crept under their skin without warmth or comfort. It was the ache of watching her son suffer for decisions she hadn't been able to control. That night, the apartment felt so empty, no glow from the lamp, no worn hum from the heater, just the steady rhythm of two hearts holding on. Rachel sat by the window, staring out at the dark street, the distant sounds of life moving on without them. Her mind raced with thoughts of how little she had left, how unfamiliar the ground beneath her feet had become. She looked down at Mason's sleeping face, peaceful now, but so fragile, and made a silent vow. This was not the end. She couldn't accept powerlessness, no matter how sharp the injustice. Somewhere deep within, a spark flickered, a stubborn refusal to give in to breaking. Tomorrow, she thought, wiping away another tear. Tomorrow she would find a way to turn this around. For Mason, for herself, she owed them that much. An unshakable promise that even in the darkest moments she would fight. Because surrender was a luxury neither of them could afford. Have you ever felt like everything was falling apart and wondered if you could survive the storm? Sometimes the bottom is just the place before the climb. The soft glow from the bedside lamp cast a warm halo over Mason's small face as Rachel knelt beside him, brushing a stray curl behind his ear. The day's exhaustion weighed heavily on her. But tonight, something in Mason's hesitation pulled her attention away from her own worries. "Mom," Mason began, voice barely above a whisper. He bit his bottom lip and glanced nervously toward the door, as if afraid someone might overhear. "There's something I wanted to tell you. Something I heard when I was at Dad's last week." Rachel's heart skipped, a mix of caution and hope stirring inside her. She took his hand gently. "Whatever it is, Mason, you can tell me." He swallowed hard, then leaned closer. "Dad was on the phone. I didn't mean to listen, but, well, I heard him say he's been hiding money. Not just a little, a lot. He said he's made the accounts tricky, so I can't take anything from them. Like he doesn't want you to get any of it." For a moment, the world seemed to still. Rachel felt a tightening in her chest, a late-night pulse of adrenaline and fear. This was the kind of secret that could explain everything. The empty bank statements, the court's cold rulings, the unbearable silence where her future should have been. "Did he say how?" she asked softly. Mason nodded, eyes wide with the gravity of what he'd overheard. "He said something about offshore accounts and shell companies, words I don't really understand. But I remember because he laughed, like he thought it was funny." Rachel inhaled deeply, a fragile hope flickering among the shadows of doubt. If Mason's words were true, this hidden trail might be her way back from the edge. But how could she, with limited legal knowledge and no resources, begin to unravel something so complicated? The next day, Rachel reached out to her neighbor, Mrs. Garner, a retired paralegal with a kind smile and a knack for cutting through red tape. Over steaming cups of chamomile tea in a cramped kitchen, smelling of baking spices and old books, Rachel shared Mason's story and her fears. Mrs. Garner listened carefully, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "This sounds serious, but it's not hopeless. We can start with what you have: emails, statements, anything odd you've seen or received. Even small details could build a picture." Together they began gathering every scrap they could find. Mason contributed too, recalling vague memories from visits and phone calls. Old emails with strange references, bank notices Rachel hadn't understood. Small inconsistencies pieced together like shards forming an image. Mrs. Garner helped Rachel organize the files into neat folders, patiently explaining each step and what the next might look like. She connected Rachel with a local legal aid group that specialized in cases where hidden assets and financial deceit were suspected. The thought of returning to a courtroom was daunting, but for the first time, Rachel felt a hand steadying hers, a partnership, a lifeline. The faintest thread of possibility was weaving its way through the darkness. That night, as Rachel closed Mason's bedroom door and the house settled into silence, she allowed herself a rare moment of cautious optimism. Maybe, just maybe, the truth could be uncovered. Maybe the fight wasn't over. What would you do with a hidden truth waiting to be revealed? Sometimes the smallest clues can change everything. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she held the sheaf of documents Mrs. Garner had helped her organize. Old emails threaded with coded language, bank statements with suspicious accounts, and Mason's detailed recollections, all painstakingly pieced together like shards of glass, forming a clear picture. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the quiet hum of a legal aid office, the tension in Rachel's chest sharp, but laced with a fragile hope. She had come so far, and this felt like the tipping point, the moment when quiet courage might break through years of silence and deception. The lawyer from the legal aid organization, a sharp-eyed woman named Tanya, reviewed the evidence with practiced intensity. "These are strong leads, Rachel. Hidden offshore accounts, manipulated finances. It's complex, but we have a case. You did the right thing bringing this forward." Rachel nodded, swallowing the nervous flutter in her throat. "I just want Mason and me to have a fair chance, to know the truth." Weeks later, the courtroom felt like a battleground. Greg sat opposite, his usual confident smirk faltering for the first time. His polished suit seemed suddenly less like armor and more like a mask slipping. The air was thick with anticipation as Tanya stood, methodical and firm, laying out the evidence. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady but charged. The defendant deliberately obscured assets and manipulated financial records, falsely portraying the petitioner as having no claim. We present clear documentation of hidden accounts discovered through careful investigation and testimony from the petitioner's son. Rachel watched Greg's eyes dart around nervously, the confident poise she remembered, replaced by something raw, a rare crack in his armor. When Tanya detailed Mason's overheard phone conversations, Greg's jaw clenched tightly, his hands trembling beneath the table. The judge leaned forward, brows furrowed, as the truth surfaced like a tide washing away years of deceit. The courtroom murmured, the verdict shifting from predetermined to uncertain. For Rachel, time slowed as she realized this unyielding battle might finally turn. Outside the courthouse, neighbors who had once turned their backs now offered nods of respect. Mason hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did it, Mom." That moment, Rachel felt a well of strength she hadn't known she possessed. A fierce, quiet power, born not from wealth or influence, but from unwavering hope and unshakable love. Greg's professional reputation crumbled in the wake of public revelation. Walls he built around himself, faltering under scrutiny. The truth exposed not just to the courts, but to the colleagues who once admired him. Rachel's life began to shift, the heavy shadows lifting, as she reclaimed not only her rightful assets, but also her dignity and confidence. The long struggle had forged a new resilience, a reminder that even the most underestimated woman can rise, her courage igniting change far beyond the courtroom walls. How often do we underestimate the power quietly growing inside us, waiting for the right moment to emerge? Sometimes, all it takes is one brave step forward to rewrite the story. The sound of the courtroom doors closing behind her echoed with finality as Rachel stepped inside, the weight of months of struggle and hope resting heavily on her shoulders. The room felt larger than she remembered, vaulted ceilings, polished wood, rows of seats filled with strangers, whose eyes seemed to weigh every move she made. But her gaze was unwavering, locked ahead to the center where her fate and Greg's would be determined. Greg sat at the table, looking smaller somehow. His once confident posture was frayed at the edges, his usual smirk replaced by a tight-lipped mask of defiance. Rachel's heart pounded, but beneath that beat burned a quiet flame, one forged in the fire of betrayal, resilience, and love for Mason. The judge entered, stern and resolute, the gavel tapping sharply against the bench. "We will proceed." Tanya, the legal aid attorney who had become Rachel's steadfast ally, rose gracefully. She laid out the evidence, the hidden accounts, the manipulated finances, Mason's courageous testimony about Greg's boasts of deception. Each fact unfolded like a heavy curtain revealing the truth, exposing Greg's carefully constructed facade for all to see. Greg's lawyer made a last-ditch effort at defense, but the cracks in the armor were too wide. The judge's eyes never left the documents, the photographs, the clear pattern of deceit. The room grew tense, the air thick with anticipation. When the judgment came, it was firm and just. Greg would relinquish the concealed assets, face professional censure, and the court would revisit custody arrangements in favor of Mason's welfare. The arrogant veil finally lifted, revealing a man accountable for his actions. Rachel felt tears prick at her eyes as the courtroom murmured approval. Mason tugged at her sleeve, a shy smile lighting his face. "Mom, we did it." She smiled back, the swell of pride and renewal flooding her heart. "We did, and we'll keep doing it." Outside, word had traveled fast. Neighbors approached with newfound respect. Whispers of admiration replaced the cold stares and judgment. Rachel's strength had become their inspiration, a beacon to those who doubted their own power to overcome. In that moment, Rachel understood something vital. This victory, while crucial, was only the beginning of a story rewritten by courage, honesty, and steadfast love. She was no longer a woman pushed to the margins, but a force reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. Have you ever faced a moment where standing tall felt impossible, yet found the strength to rise anyway? Sometimes, true victory comes not from the absence of struggle, but from the courage to keep fighting despite it all. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the modest living room where Rachel and Mason sat side by side on the threadbare couch. Their new home wasn't grand or flashy, but it brimmed with quiet hope, a sanctuary born not from wealth, but from resilience. Around them, boxes still awaited unpacking, yet the clutter could never mask the smile spreading across Rachel's face or the light sparkling in Mason's eyes. For years, Rachel had carried burdens she never imagined, from the sting of betrayal to the suffocating weight of judgment. But today, those shadows had softened into a distant echo. She traced a gentle finger over Mason's hair and breathed in the fresh scent of possibility that filled the air. "Mom," Mason whispered, his voice steady and sure. "We're really okay now, aren't we?" Rachel smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling with tears. She no longer fought back. "Yes, sweetheart, we are. And we'll keep building a life that's strong because love and courage carry us through." Her journey had been anything but easy. She recalled the lonely nights of uncertainty, the endless struggle to prove her worth in a world quick to dismiss her. But through it all, she had discovered a truth far more valuable than money or titles. Integrity and perseverance shape our true strength. Rachel now poured that strength into helping others. Volunteering with local organizations that assisted women facing hardship, sharing her story quietly but powerfully. She found purpose in lifting others up, turning her pain into empathy and action. Each woman she met, each story she heard, deepened her resolve to be a beacon of hope. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, Rachel sat by the window, watching Mason play in the yard. She thought about how often society measures worth by dollars or opinions. But she knew better now. Real value came from standing tall in the face of adversity, from kindness offered without expectation, and from the simple, steadfast power of love. Her heart was full, not just of relief, but of gratitude and fierce joy. Life's hardships had tested her, but they had not broken her. They had made her whole. What about you? When life feels overwhelming, could the quiet strength within you become the very thing that carries you beyond? If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. See you in our next story.